future use. So let's kick off. SAP Lumira, tips, tricks from the community and experiences from the real world. So what I wanted to do is actually just share some of the insights I've found when I'm talking about Lumira with customers of Intelligence and within the wider SAP community. Well, by way of introduction, my name's Andrew Fox. I work for Intelligence in the UK. I'm an analytics evangelist, so really that's around spreading the good news, spreading all the new news from SAP. Part of my job is really keeping in touch with what's happening in the world of analytics from SAP and then relaying that and making it personal and sensible to our Intelligence customers. I'm an active user of social media, so if you use Twitter, you can follow me there. I'm always tweeting about all things BI and analytics. What I want to try and do is kick off with a quick poll just to give me an idea of what's going on out there. So you should see a poll pop up saying, oh no, there we go, launch poll. Get it there, it's popped up on the screen. Just to give me a flavour, how many people actually use SAP Lumira today in their business? So give me a flavour and a feeling. Anybody using it in anger? Anybody evaluating it? Anybody just not even looked at it yet? So we'll give it a few more seconds for the numbers to settle down. Okay, I'll close off that poll. What's really interesting for me is we've got a 50-50 split. It's the first time I've ever had that between people saying no and people saying evaluating. So what's interesting there is no one's actually using Lumira yet in the real world for those on this webinar, but some of you are actually thinking and evaluating it today. So hopefully what I'm going to talk about will give you some real world experiences and some tips and tricks I've picked up. Okay, so my presentation style is incredibly relaxed. I normally do these sorts of sessions face-to-face, and a number of attendees I can see on the list have seen me present personally. So I'm very relaxed. Please ask questions in the Q&A panel, the question box or the chat panel. I will be watching both as we are talking. So it's always a challenge for me to look up at my screen, talk, look down at all the control panels. But feel free, ask questions, interject. That way I know I'm hitting the buttons for what you want to know. In a room, it's very easy because I get body language and feedback. On a webinar, it's a bit tougher. So let me know if you want me to go over something again, just interject and ask questions. The agenda we're going to try and cover today is really around those real life use cases. So where I'm working with people who are actually using Lumira today. Some of the challenges people are experiencing in their use, so being honest in the feedback I'm receiving. And then for a bit of fun at the end, if we have time, there are some quite influential visualizations in history, which I've tried to recreate using Lumira, and there's a few sort of stories and best practices around that, which I can share at the end. As on the agenda says, time for questions at the end. We're going to do a formal Q&A, but please ask as we go through. So I'll start off with saying, what's all the noise about Lumira? To be honest, you must have been doing this if you haven't heard of the word Lumira from SAP. SAP are actively marketing Lumira extensively. It's all over their social media streams. Any conference you go to, Lumira will be being mentioned everywhere. What Lumira is, in my simplistic opinion, it's all about acquiring our data, sorting our data, arranging it, and then visually presenting it. So it's taking that big pile of Lego bricks, making some sense of them, and then that's sharing the knowledge and information you find in that. You could call that sharing the insights. How Lumira works, so those of you evaluating this will have been through this workflow, people who were the no's earlier. Just to give you a flavour, Lumira is a sort of a stepped process for analysts. So not the general user yet today, but really aimed at the people who have got analyst in their job title, business analyst, data analyst, technical analyst, those sorts of guys who will acquire data, actually go and grab data, be that from our business objects universe, be that from a flat file, be that from a freehand SQL statement they can type in, various places they get the data. They can then change that data or enrich it. So as we acquire the data, it physically loads it locally into the data engine of SAP Lumira. So Lumira comes with a data engine under the hood. Once that data is in that data engine, we can make enrichments to it. We can change it. You could say that's a good thing or a bad thing, depends on your view. But these guys who it's aimed at today, the analysts, they're doing this anyway. So we want to enable them to do it quicker and easier and in a controlled manner. So the data enrichment can be anything from fixing data quality problems. It can be anything from modeling to say, what if I take all these accounts from salesman A and give them to salesman B? It could be changing geographies so we can plot our cities or our countries on a geographical map so we get a location intelligence or mapping style intelligence. So that enrichment's quite powerful. We can then build out visualizations the same way we do in Webby or Explorer. We're building grids and graphs and laying them out on a page. Doing some data exploration, well, that's the whole process the analyst is doing. They're acquiring and they're building their visualizations to explore the data, to find out those insights. And then the ability to share that information out. So a question that's come in, thank you, Andrew, is that's the Sybase engine, correct? Yep, that's right. It's Sybase IQ runtime is hidden under SAP Lumira. That's exactly correct. Okay. So in terms of some of the real life use cases, I've got 3 or 4 I want to share with you today, starting quite simply and then building from there. So this was a really simple one. We've all been in meetings. This photograph should resonate with everybody where you think, I'm so bored, I'm just going to fall asleep. Well, what we want to try and do is actually make those meetings more engaging. So this is a friend of mine by the name of Tim Guest. He's an SAP mentor. I've been fortunate enough to present a couple of times at the SAP Inside Track events. They run them every year. They're a community-based SAP event. And Tim asked me to present around SAP Lumira. So he was organising the Inside Track event. He sat in on my session around Lumira, and suddenly the penny dropped with him, hey, I can use this technology within my own organisation. So he's a user of SAP Business One, if you've heard of that. So SAP Business One is sort of ERP Lite or ERP for the small, medium enterprise. So they've got ERP. What Tim was doing on a periodic basis was taking that data out of SAP B1 into Excel, mucking around with it, and then doing Excel charts. What he wanted to do was take it one stage further and make those Excel charts properly engaging. Wanted to use them to play back in the meeting rather than doing it in Excel, then copying them, pasting them into PowerPoint, and then presenting the PowerPoint. What the workflow he went through was take his data out in the normal way from Business One as he was doing before, doing some Excel manipulation, again, what he was doing before, but then doing some very simple charting within Lumira to give him the ability to actually play that story back in the sales meeting using Lumira, therefore cutting the steps of do the graphs in Excel, copy and paste them into PowerPoint, and deliver the PowerPoint. It was accelerating the process for him, and he found the workflow so easily repeatable, he could just reload his Excel spreadsheet every month into Lumira, and all the graphs were done for him. He didn't have to do anything extra. So in terms of his feedback, at a very simple level is how he was using it. The first impressions were very simple, very slick, very easy to do. Something which was on the flip side was he felt that the Lumira product wasn't as intuitive as he expected SAP wanted it to be. So he found a couple of the workflows, a couple of the buttons, not quite as obvious as it was. Tim was doing this probably 3 to 6 months ago was the last time I spoke to Tim around this topic. And since then, we have had a couple of releases of Lumira. So Lumira is being released from SAP about every 6 weeks. So we'll get a new version of it. And some of his concerns have been addressed. So there are now much more obvious buttons for things like ranking, sorting, the stuff we want to do all the time. There are now buttons to do that rather than being hidden on little menus. So his feedback is spot on, but a lot of that has been addressed now. In terms of how he was using it, he was using the SAP Lumira on the desktop, but he was also using the cloud version. So if you're not aware, SAP Lumira has got sort of 3 states. I try to refer to this as like the 3 states of water. 3 states of water. We've got liquid, we've got steam, we've got ice. So if you play that onto Lumira as an analogy, Lumira, we've got the desktop version. We've got a cloud version, so software as a service in the cloud, and we've then got a HANA on-premise version. So we've got on-premise via an internet or a web page. We've got in the cloud via a web page, or we've got the desktop product. What Tim was found was very useful. He was able to do his work on his desktop, but then save his outputs up to the cloud. So wherever he was working, he was absolutely able to use the same data with the same visualizations with pretty much the same functionality between each one. So there's another question. Do those three versions of Lumira have the same functionality? They have the same functionality in the visualizations area, so doing the grids and the graphs and laying out the stories and laying them out on a page. The cloud version doesn't have a strong data preparation. So we can't do the data manipulations in the cloud yet, because the cloud's not holding that data engine. So that Sybase IQ engine. So desktop, we can load the data and we can then manipulate that data, whereas cloud is much more of an end user experience. Now the data's been prepared for me, I can visualize it, play with it, find the insights in there. And a question I asked to Tim towards the end of our times together was, hey, why use Lumira and not Excel? Because you were using Excel before. What he suggested, as it says there, it just looked better. It looked slicker. It looked easier. Within some of the graphing types, you can do animation. It might sound a bit of a silly thing, but it's how you tell a story with your data makes the impact to the person you're talking to. So if you can see sales over time of a certain product animating by day, going up, going down, going up, going down, that can tell a story so easily rather than a standard bar graph where the eye scans along it and the impact's not there. So those are some of the flavours and thoughts that Tim was saying from one use case in the sales meeting. He gave a customer quote, which was quite useful. So what was it enabled to do? It enabled him to delve deeper into real-time business data, simply loading into Lumira for slicing and dicing. So I think the key words around this use case are its simplicity, easy to use, and it was repeatable because that Excel spreadsheet could just be reloaded into Lumira and the visualizations just refreshed. The next use case I want to rattle through is in the industry of reinsurance. So if you're not familiar with the reinsurance world, that's where an organisation, insurance company would say, we need to insure a fleet of oil tankers, but that's too much for them to risk. So they then chunk that up and sell on portions of that risk to company B. So we've got one umbrella at the top, shares it down to two umbrellas. Those two umbrellas say, well, we can take so much, and then we pass it down to some other people. So the reinsurance industry is around sharing that risk and that insurance across many, many organisations. The company I was working with, been around since the 1800s, really interesting company to work with. But what makes this one sort of resonate for me is it's nothing to do with their core business. So how they're using Lumira has got nothing to do with the reinsurance world. What it was is within their organisation, they implemented Microsoft Link. So if anyone's familiar with Microsoft Link, it's the instant messenger tool. Years ago, we had Google Messenger and we had Instant Messenger. They were quite popular. Well, these guys implemented the Microsoft version called Microsoft Link. And the reason to do this was to enable them to actually encourage inter-company or inter-business, inter-department communication. So they really wanted to make sure the guys in the UK could speak to Singapore, could speak out to Australia, simply and easily, rather than writing tomes of emails. So after they implemented Microsoft for 3 months, they implemented it 3 months later, they said, is this actually working? Are we using this appropriately? So what they went through and did, well, the guys from this company actually came on an intelligence test drive. So it's something we run every month where customers come in and people are new to the BI technology and they get their hands on with SAP BI4 in this case. So they play with Lumira, Explorer, Design Studio, etc. And while they were in my hands-on test drive, this challenge that had been given to them about Microsoft Link data, again, it resonated and thought, why don't we use Lumira to actually analyse this Microsoft Link data? Because it's a spreadsheet, it's a log file, we can just pull it straight in. So the guys at this organisation went and did their analysis, prepared their analysis, and then gave it to their CEO to present. So if you can imagine the standard quarterly State of the Nation address, whereby the CEO stands up and gives the boring, here's the company numbers, here's the economic climate, all that stuff. Right at the end, he said, oh, and one more thing. This Microsoft link we've all implemented, we've been doing some analysis on it. And the CEO, from his presentation, used the Lumira story and actually walked through different charts to say, well, we can see Department 9 are using this brilliantly. Isn't that great? Well, who's using it most? Well, Department 1, top 10 users. Department 4's top 10 users. Wow, Department 9, that's got loads of the top 10 users. What's happening there? Who's Department 9 talking to? Department 9. Hey, that doesn't sound right. Let's look at the data. In Department 9, we've got user 218 and user 251. Hey, what does that mean? What they found out by analysing the Microsoft Link data was individuals who physically sit next to each other in the general office were talking to each other using the Microsoft Link technology. So rather than having the view that they were able to share that communication across boundaries, across borders, across geographies, actually people sitting next to each other were using it to chat to each other. So totally not what they were expecting the use case to be. So this is some of the sort of screenshots the CEO was presenting, and then he went through and said right towards the end was, actually, we know who you are. We might have anonymised these to user 218, user type 251, but we absolutely know who those users are. Beware, because I will pull out this technology if it is continued to be abused in this way. So we went through. This was. I've also got fake data in here, so we're not talking about real people's names. But internally, this is the example where they take their user IDs and transpose them onto their proper names. And you can see in this example, in my fake data, Ella has been talking to Jenny 769 times. So as a use case here, it was around using Lumira to actually investigate data that was non-standard. It wasn't in their corporate data warehouse. It was a special project, but it made it quick and easy to draw the insights or take the story out of the data. Because that's what we're hearing more and more. People want to understand their data, get those insights, but actually dig in and find out what story that data is telling us. This organisation, what they loved Lumira. They liked it was free. So I'm waiting for some questions to pop up here. What do you mean free? Free is an interesting word. There is a free copy of Lumira for download. It can talk to Excel spreadsheets only, but there is a fully functional, fully featured Lumira you can download and evaluate straight away. The version that's either included in your SAP licensing or as an additional to SAP licensing, that's not free, but that unlocks the ability to talk to a universe, that unlocks the ability to talk to freehand SQL statements, to talk to SAP HANA, things like that. But in the example I just used here, this organisation, the free version was completely valid for them because they had an Excel spreadsheet of this Microsoft Link data. They again suggested simple and easy to get up and running, zero training. They found the technology quite easy to use. One comment that they made was they really wanted to take take the story that the CEO was going through and drop it into PowerPoint very easily. They resorted to using screen prints. So something that I've looked at in the Lumira public-facing roadmap, and absolutely on the roadmap of development from SAP, is the ability to take the Lumira stories, so the collections of all those graphs interactively, and drop them into PowerPoint as of interactive content. So that you'll be able to click on it, you'll be able to play with it inside PowerPoint where you've created the actual content inside Lumira. Rattling through another use case. I used this screenshot quite specifically. So that's the International Space Station that's circling around the world. The company called Honeywell Aerospace, they create components that are used, not exclusively, but the components that they use are actually on the space station flying around the world today. As I mentioned at the start, I do a lot of work on SCN, so I'm within the SAP community, volunteer for different stuff. I've been writing some blogs around SAP Lumira on an SCN, and a guy popped up in the sort of Q&A session around it, asking questions around some of the new features. This guy called Dennis Scoville, he worked for Honeywell Aerospace. So through him, I watched a webinar he delivered back in May, which was titled "Here How HANA Enabled Honeywell to Deliver Information." Sounding rather boring for some people, but to me, it wasn't just the HANA piece that was of interest. It was around this concept that he wanted to explain and how self-service BI is helping Honeywell Aerospace. So the concept of self-service, governed data discovery is helping Honeywell Aerospace. The project he was using as his example was around something which is not an area of my expertise: revenue, direct costs, and direct margin predictability model. Sounds complicated. There was a lot of work in HANA done to collect the data, mash, merge, and mangle the data in HANA. But what I drew out of this example was all the data they'd lifted and heavy lifted inside HANA. They used SAP Lumira as the visualization tool for that. In about 30 minutes, he found out some amazing insights within that data. So Dennis was the guy who was organising the project from a back-end perspective. He then sat down with a finance user, so sat next to a finance user. Here's Lumira. Here's the data. Let's work through together some examples of how they can actually look at that data. So these are some of the screenshots he presented around the ability to look at revenue year on year, revenue year by quarter. It sounds simplistic, but for them, they were totally unable to do this, and all of these charts were done by the finance user themselves. So it wasn't IT delivering this. This was the finance user saying, what would be interesting would be to have a revenue split by my business sections, my business segments, by year by quarter, making it very easy for them to look through at their data sets. Another couple of examples there. So the overall feedback from Honeywell was it was minimal training needed for this term data junkies. So I've heard data junkies, I've heard data wranglers, I've heard propeller heads, whatever name you want to give it. I come back to where I said at the start, this person called and somebody's got analyst in their job title, a business analyst, a data analyst, a technical analyst, a finance analyst. Those sorts of guys who are quite familiar with using Excel and other tools to wrangle with their data. The view here was minimal training required, which was great to hear. A couple of extra bits of feedback that came through was if we're using our universes as a data source, we're going to need to do a little bit of universe work because we can't create the where clause, so region equal 1, segment equal 3. We can't create those on the fly in Lumira. What we can use are the predefined filters in our universe. So if those of you are familiar with the universe, the predefined filters are those yellow objects that look like a funnel which restrict our data. So it may be to get the best out of Lumira, we may have to create some more predefined filters than we have already. He also found that, in his words, the number of facets, so in business objects language, the number of dimensions we bring back in our query sometimes has an impact on the performance. So if you're using Explorer, he was suggesting you'll get between 12 or 15 facets, 12 or 15 dimensions in Explorer, whereas Lumira we get to about 25 before he saw some sort of degradation in performance. The thing to remember there is because Lumira is a desktop product, it's using the horsepower of your desktop. So if you've got a lowly powered desktop PC with sort of 3 gig of RAM in it versus someone who's got a high-spec PC with 16 gig of RAM in it, obviously there will be performance differences between the two. Another thing he found was within Lumira, I mentioned before on the data sources, we can actually go and use freehand SQL statements. So rather than using the universe, we can use freehand SQL. What he found was that whereas if you use Oracle's own tools, the queries, where there were 6 queries he was running in an Oracle tool, took 5 minutes to come back. In Lumira, it took 30 minutes to come back. So the suggestion there is between parallel and serial running of queries. So just don't always make the assumption how it's done before is how it's going to work now. There may well be some differences, and test before you go any further. And the sort of the final bit of feedback from Honeywell was, so the supply chain finance director was able to use these Lumira stories, these storyboards, just like he used PowerPoint. So whereas in the previous example, they wanted to take Lumira and put it in PowerPoint, these guys, Honeywell, said, well, actually, Lumira stories are as good as PowerPoint for me. I can tell the story I want to do using the Lumira product real time rather than taking it out and sticking it in PowerPoint. So I thought that was very interesting that the finance director was able to use it quite clearly in his presentations. If that use case is of interest to you and you want to dig a bit deeper in it, then there is it's freely available on the internet. So there's a YouTube link up the top there. Jot that down, or these slides will be available to you later, and you can click on it at that point. But it's worthwhile spending sort of half an hour just skipping through to hear the full backstory that Dennis goes through. The final use case I want to go through is something that a little different. So what's the phrase? We by organisations, we drink our own champagne, or the more horrible version, we eat our own dog food. SAP presented at the recent TechEd conferences how they were using Lumira to understand the use of SCN. So it would be interesting to know if people out there are actually using SCN, the SAP Community Network. It's the sort of the one-stop shop, the place whereby we should be going for our technical information, our community information, and that sort of sharing area. What SAP have done to try and encourage people to use it, they've actually put some goals, or the phrase would be called gamification. Make the experience more fun to use. So they brought in this initiative a little while ago to actually get people to get points, get badges when they do their daily use of SCN. So at the end of a day's work or the end of a certain thing, you may well have 5-10 points more. You may well have some badges on your banner, just to try and bring some more fun into it. So what they did, all that data they're collecting from SCN is obviously in log files. But those log files, you can imagine how many SAP users across the planet are using SCN. It's immense. So every time you log on, every time you create a blog, every time you click on something, that data is trapped. So their biggest challenge in this use case was around getting their data in order before they did anything else. So it's how they can actually take their data, which is these huge, great internet files, and then copy them, use them. And what they did was obviously put it into HANA because it was a large data volume, and use Lumira over HANA to try and find out these stories. So some of the questions they were trying to ask were, in this example, how many missions influencing community adoption? How are the missions influencing adoption? So just because we've made this gamification, is it actually working? What they found was it was very easy to drop back to our visualizations we used before. So let's do a wonderful pie chart. Was it useful? Too many segments, you can hardly read it. Was the funnel chart any use? Absolutely not. It was completely irrelevant. So they went through using Lumira and thought, before we can just use the whole data set, we've got to do some data enrichment. So we've got to do some data preparation. So whereas when I spoke at the start about how Lumira works, I suggested the data enrichment area. So for an example here, we look at on the left-hand side in replace, I voted for the question mark, real founder of SCN. So they went through a process of, if you find the question marks together, replace that with a set of speech quotes. So they're actually doing, you could call it data quality, you could call it data enrichment, but they're actually going through and making the data more appropriate for the visualizations they wanted to use. So they went through a bit of this data preparation within Lumira, and actually went through a really simple bar chart. It does not have to be complicated to get the insights they wanted out of it. So what they wanted to do was help SCN focus on what matters. So they looked at various different methods of getting people engaged in SCN, and they saw the email reminders added limited value to the onboarding process. Even though there's a mass email campaign went out, the number of people who actually joined and started using the gamification process didn't really increase at all. So the email process was not working, Action, let's stop doing the emails. Let's do it a different way. So from that mass amount of data, they were able to change the process of how they were marketing and getting people on board into SCN. Another example is, well, which day of the week is the best day to launch missions? So if those emails are going out, or if there's other communication methods going out, like a new home screen or something on the launch pad, is it best to do it on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or Thursday, or a Friday? When's the right time to do it? So again, they went through their process with some more data preparation, the replacing of sort of find 00 in their data set and replace it with Monday to make the data easier to read. So in the traditional models, you'd have to go back to your database provider. You've got a column called day of week with 0001 in it. Whereas for my reporting, I want Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Can you go back and fix that at a data level? How long is that going to take to get fixed? What are the hoops we've got to jump through? What are the change requests we've got to do? Whereas with Lumira, these guys who were doing this analysis found it was very quick and very easy to actually go through and do that data changing themselves. So what they were able to look at was the best day to launch. So what days are launching? So how many missions were completed, so they could see what days they launched something and what was the total missions on that day. Then breaking out a different way via a heat map. But very, very simply, it was the impact of featuring missions on the homepage. So if they actually, instead of using the email campaign, they actually put something on the homepage. When you log on to scn.sap.com, there's a new button there. People naturally go, oh, what's this? And click on it. So they found it changed, by having that insight, it changed the way they did their campaigns to get people using SCN better. The final one, which was a very interesting one for SAP to present at a conference, was around how people actually were behaving very badly, inappropriately on the SCN. So on SCN, when you log in, you create a profile, you start looking around. If you like somebody's comments, if you like their answer they gave to a question, you can click on a little like you would do in any other social media tool, and the person who you've liked gets some points. And those points don't mean prizes in terms of anything financial or anything in that way, but there are a lot of people who think points is everything in SCN. Rather than sharing community, they're sort of striving to be the one with the biggest number. And what SAP were finding were people were liking each other's, and then 20 people potentially from the same organisation were liking somebody's. So it was actually people were falsifying their points by sort of orchestrating profiles. And in this example here, people who were creating fake profiles to go ahead and like and gain points. So they saw this as a real challenge for them, and what they wanted to do was actually take some quite bold steps to stop people basically misbehaving on there. And what they were very conscious of, they wanted to make sure they didn't want to stop people using it, but they really wanted to make people aware just by doing this process is not helping anybody. So if you are caught by a moderator being bad, doing bad behaviour, we will basically block your account. It's very simple like that. We will remove the points which we can see are inappropriate. So after making some very bold sort of statements of how they're going to deal with the problem, how they're going to deal with this bad behaviour, obviously they wanted to see, is that making any impact? So a simple line graph they've got here is actually how many people are creating over time, and after their bold step of we're going to make some changes here, what actually happened to the likes? So as you can see, the line chart plummets, so the number of likes drops down, which is what you'd expect by having that bad behaviour nipped in the bud. But the actual people who are content creating, who are creating likes, who are creating new things inside the community, which is what you want, that didn't change at all. So they managed to maintain the usage and the community aspect, but actually go through and reduce the bad behaviour on that website. So I thought that was an interesting one from SAP, where they're using their own information and their own technologies to actually go ahead and make physical changes as to how they do their business. What I want to move on to now is just some of the challenges I'm hearing from people. So I do a lot of public speaking around Lumira, as I say, and I talk to a lot of people about, well, what do you think? What do you feel? What's useful? What's hard? So like any technology, when you release it, there are challenges ahead. It doesn't always go swimmingly, and each organisation is very different. So what's a challenge to one organisation won't be to another. Oh, so my screen didn't build very well, so let me just delete a few of these things while we're online. So essentially, when I talked earlier about the 3 states of water and the 3 versions of Lumira, we've got Lumira Desktop, we've got Lumira Cloud, and we've got Lumira Server. There is a reliance for Lumira Server on SAP HANA. So Lumira Server is written as a HANA XS application. So it's using the XS engine inside HANA. So what the feedback I've had and SAP have heard loud and clear is we do not want to go ahead in the SME world, the small medium enterprise world, to be forced to buy HANA to enable us to use Lumira Server. So a lot of people are getting quite animated that they felt they were being pushed into buying HANA for this small piece of functionality. SAP have listened, and I'll bring what I just deleted back up again on screen, in that they've actually announced something called SAP Lumira Edge Edition. What does that mean? We're still waiting to hear the meat on the bones as to what it is, but essentially there is going to be a version of Lumira Server that does not require SAP HANA. So it will work in a different way. It will work on commodity hardware is the phrase. So it won't be requiring the HANA hardware, but there will be a version of Lumira Server, which you could say is the Lumira Cloud, but on premise. Think of it in those ways. But there will be Lumira Server. We'll be able to run inside our organizations without having to have HANA. So the challenge was we need HANA for Lumira Server. SAP have listened to that and are giving us a way around it. There's no ETA or dates on this yet when it's going to be delivered to us, but it certainly will be sometime next year. Another example is around patching. So if we've got HANA and Lumira Server, and we've got BI4, and we've got Lumira Desktop, they all have different release cycles. They all have different patching cycles and different interoperabilities. So I know even within my own organization, I can't implement Lumira Server today in my dev landscape because my dev HANA is not at a specific patch to enable me to do it. So we need to be aware that there may well be challenges as we go forward implementing Lumira, not from the desktop perspective, but when we make it enterprise ready and more industrial, when more people are using it in time, we may need to be very aware of how that patching process works, and don't let somebody patch our HANA box without realizing the interrelationships of Lumira Server. And conversely, don't let somebody patch our BI platform box, our business object server, because that again may well have impact on the whole community of technologies. So just be aware of the challenge there. We've got to look at it as a holistic view, not just as their individual silos. It's interesting to me that people identified that Lumira Desktop, because it's being released every 6 weeks, is actually a challenge. Whereas for me, it's fantastic because in my organisation, I can install software, I can do anything to my PC because of the role I do. But if we think of a wider organisation, if you have a standard desktop policy, you don't have admin rights. How are you going to load the new version of the product every 6 weeks? One company I was working with said by the time they download the version of Lumira, they send it to their desktop team who review it, package it up, deploy it out on the next deploying of the standard desktop policy. It will be longer than 6 weeks. Therefore, the new version of Lumira will already be out. So for them, becoming every 6 weeks was fantastic from a functionality point of view, but it wasn't good enough for them from a deployment perspective. In that organisation, what they decided to do was take every 3rd version of Lumira. So let's say once a quarter, go through the patching and the packaging and deployment cycle to release it out, rather than going for every single one. So it may well be we're at version 1.19 of Lumira today. Let's say we'll take 1.20, 1.23, 1.26, 1.29, etc., etc. So rather than doing every one, there may be a challenge if you don't have those admin rights on your local PC to do that install. You may well want to look at it in a different way. So the release coming every 6 weeks is great, but there are some challenges around it. The final challenge that was sort of being spoken to me about was the question is, where are SAP actually taking SAP Lumira? So this is more sort of a hypothetical discussion rather than anything factual. The question was really, well, when Lumira was brought out, version 1, it would appear it was going after the competition. We could list a competition here. It's unfair for me to do so, but there are a couple of other organisations and a couple of software companies who do things very similar to Lumira. Well, are we going after beating the competition? But as we went from 1.0 to 1.3, 1.5, 1.10, now out to 1.19, 1.20, we've got Lumira Server. We've got Lumira Cloud. Are we heading out to try and be an enterprise grade technology? So rather than being a boutique, fits one type of workflow, one type of thing within an organization, are we swinging out and trying to be enterprise grade? If that's the case, are we going to swing back and try and go after the competition again? So one of the challenges being told to me is people don't actually get where Lumira is going and where it's going within the technology stack. Is it trying just to be a niche BI data visualization tool, or is it trying to be something enterprise grade to roll out across the whole of the company where people write content but other consumers consume it in either cloud or server? I've got my own opinion, so I've got my Andrew Fox opinion, I've got my Intelligence UK opinion, and I've got my SAP authorized opinion. What I would say in today's webinar would be have a look at the convergence roadmap. So SAP have made some very, very clear statements of direction around where they are taking technology, what they're going to be doing with the BI tools. So if you list them out, at the moment, we've got about 14 different BI tools in the BI4 stack. So we've got our Webbies, our Crystals, we've got our Design Studios, our dashboards, our Lumira, our Explorer. You can't forget Live Office, Query as a web service, BI widgets, the list goes on. And there's been some criticism over time that there are just too many tools inside that stack. SAP have listened to that, and their mantra at the moment, if you listen to any of their releases, is simplify, simplification, simplify, simplify, simplify. So what they're going to be doing is they're actually going to be converging the tools of those 14 we know today down to 5. So there's only going to be 5 tools going forward from SAP in the BI stack. So have a look for those press releases. If you can't find them, or you're having trouble, you want to talk more about that, reach out to me personally. I'll put you in touch with the right places. But with that convergence roadmap of those things coming together, when you look at a drawing, a diagram around that, a lot of technologies are going to fold into Lumira. Explorer, for an example, the things we do in Explorer are going to fold into Lumira. So that convergence roadmap will hopefully take some of this confusion away as to where SAP are taking Lumira, that it's going to be one of their go-to market technologies of the 5 going forward. So it's something to really keep an eye on. And to me, it's not a matter of if we implement Lumira, it's going to be a matter of when we implement Lumira, because SAP will be using that much stronger going forward. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I just want to whiz through a couple of fun things towards the end, just to sort of show Lumira in a different light. What I want to go through is looking at some of the most influential visualizations of the world. So I'm a bit of a sort of a data geek and a data visualization geek. I do a lot of sort of reading around the topic, and there are probably half a dozen visualizations in history that really changed the world in which we see it today. So again, this screen isn't loading properly. I'm going to do that. Oh no, too many deletes. Here we go. I want to talk about Jon Snow. So not the Jon Snow that we have from Game of Thrones, but actually the next Jon Snow from the 1800s. So John Snow was an epidemiologist back in the 1800s. He was considered one of the fathers of epidemiology. So if you don't know what epidemiology is, Wikipedia is your friend. It's actually taking and understanding medical data. So looking at data in the medical world and gaining understanding out of it. Because what he was able to do was actually look at the data around a cholera outbreak in London, and from that data draw some insights. So what there was, back in the 1800s, there was a cholera outbreak. In 10 days, over 500 people died. So it's a mass amount of people died from cholera in such a short amount of time. So the screenshot there on the right is a piece of work he did, which John Snow did, which plotted the deaths by household in that area. And he was trying to understand what was happening. Up until this point, the general view was cholera was an airborne disease. But he was able to use his work and understand from that cholera wasn't an airborne disease, it's actually a waterborne disease. So this is a photograph of one of the books of the time. The British Library I went to have got these examples on public display. So this is a book, a physical book from the 1800s. And what he was able to do was plot those out, and I've used SAP Lumira now to do that, plotting the number of deaths by street. And if you look at some of those footballs, they've got exclamation marks in them. So run sort of pretty much dead centre, next to a bubble showing the number of deaths. Those exclamation marks are actually water pumps. So in the olden days, the hand pumps, we had to pump the water by hand from the street. What he was able to prove was the amount of deaths was centralised around water pumps. It wasn't all the water pumps, because you look at the drawing, there are a number where there are no deaths around it. It was one specific water pump. By removing the handle of that water pump, the actual number of deaths from cholera degraded and reduced significantly quickly. And what he found out from his own research and the research of the time, unfortunately, there were mothers cleaning babies' nappies inside that water pump. So it was the feces from the nappies that was causing the cholera. And in today's science, we absolutely see the link between hygiene and cholera. So it was great here from the olden days to take the maps we see from the British Library, take that same data set and move it through into SAP Lumira to see that same sort of that visualization done and the insights that can be drawn. The second one to look at is Florence Nightingale. We've probably all heard about Florence Nightingale, the Lady of the Lamp. But did you know she was also a fantastic statistician? She had an amazing mathematical mind. And if you remember that she went to the Crimean War, she was a nurse in the Crimean War, and as the story goes, the urban myth goes, she was absolutely horrified when she got to the war zone around the hygiene in the hospitals. And what she wanted to do was to try and convince the army to invest in the hospital and healthcare, because that's going to save more people than guns and ammunition. So what she wanted to do was actually take some data which she'd collected around deaths and use the data to tell a story to get the army to spend more money on healthcare. So this is the book again in the British Library. I sort of zoned it up a bit to have a look at it. I personally find this quite difficult to read. It took me a long time to get my head around what it's showing. So the big radar chart on the right-hand side is a time zone going clockwise, April, May, June, July, August, September. And then we get around to March. The dotted line takes us from right to left to the smaller one where it says April through to August. So what we've got there is a linear time frame plotting the number of deaths around the Army of the East back in the 1800s. So I went through into Lumira and used the same data set, so I was able to transpose it out of that book, which was in the British Library, and you can see here where the number of deaths was climbing from the 1854. Florence Nightingale comes on the scene, changes medical practices, and we can see that plummet of deaths when that's happened. So you can see over a period of 3 months the incline but then subsequent decline of deaths from preventable diseases. So using Lumira in this case to simplify a very old diagram, but actually tell the story of the impact that things can have. So again, it's an example of how Lumira and telling those stories to actually tell stories for people to listen and understand to then take action upon. So we're coming towards the top of the hour. I've got sort of 10 minutes left, so I want to leave time for Q&A if we needed to. So some of my sort of summary slides will be, there are opportunities ahead with Lumira. It's a great little bit of technology. It's a desktop product at the moment. It's got the cloud ability, the server ability. We should be getting server without the need for HANA in 2015 at some point. There's some amazing things we can do with the technology, and we don't always have to put our handcuffs on and think it's only about our corporate data sets. It can be around any data we have access to in our organization. It's not just our corporate data warehouse. If we look at the reinsurance example, our Microsoft Link data, something we'd never have thought of exploring before, we can go ahead and do that. So the community feedback, the people I was getting from the community, the ideas I was getting there, was people absolutely love the free version. And why wouldn't you love the free version? Yeah, so if you've got, you can go on to, I think it's trylumira.com and download a free version of it today and do that evaluation, which some of you already evaluated the technology. So those people who said, no, you're not using it today, have a look, download the free version, ask any questions. We're happy to help out any way we can. From a licensing perspective, if you have the Enterprise Suite license, so if you have the Suite license where you can use any technology, Lumira is absolutely included in that. So if you've got Suite, from a licensing perspective, you can use the full-featured, full data source use of Lumira. Other feedback, as you can see here, was around minimal training. So there was some debate around our first use case said it wasn't quite as intuitive, and the subsequent two said it was very easy. Depends on the individual, in my opinion. You can certainly get kicked off very quickly with Lumira with minimal training. The one thing I would suggest, there's within SCN, within the SAP Community Network, there's a Learn BI section which has tons and tons of 1-2 minute videos. I think it's a great way of learning. I want to know how to acquire a data source. I want to know how to rank, to sort. I want to know how to publish. Here's a 2-minute video. Click on it, watch it, do it yourself. So I think Learn BI, minimal training, absolutely agree with that feedback from the community. And the one I like most, again, the screen's not right. Let me take that down so we can read it, is it didn't take long to find the story in the data. So to me, that's really key. We can load the data into Lumira. We look at the Honeywell Aerospace example. Within half an hour, the finance user was getting insights he could not do before. In that example, there was some data preparation done prior to him, but it's all about empowering the end user, that self-service BI, to enable people to go ahead and use it. So those are sort of the key themes and key takeaways I've got from people I've been speaking to, and some use cases there. As we're coming towards the end, Q&A panel, please ask some questions. Please feel free. Some people have been asking as we've been going along. There's a Q&A panel, the chat panel. I'll give it a few minutes for people to type any questions in there or any feedback in there. So a question is, what industries in particular have we seen a high intake? To me, Lumira is not industry specific. It's very, very agnostic. I'm seeing it personally in the accounts I'm working with within finance and retail, but that's the sort of the exposure I have personally at the moment. But if I was to ask that question, which I will do now that that's come through, I'm presenting this exact same presentation at the SAP User Group Conference, which starts this coming Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. When I present this, I'll put another poll question in and say, what industries are you from? Great idea. I'll find out more information. But at the moment, it's really cross-industry. It's quite agnostic because whether it's, I'll say brutally, whether it's baked beans, cars, tomatoes, it's a unit of measure of one, and we want to understand that unit of measure of one. How many, how often, where, when, etc. So great question. Thank you. Any other observations or questions? Those of you who are evaluating it, it'd be interesting to have any questions or feedback as to what you're finding in the evaluations. Are the evaluations going well? Are the evaluations stalling? Are you seeing internal use cases of where you can use it? So if anybody can share some questions or some feedback about that, that would be useful to share around those on the call. Excuse me. Okay, so not many questions coming in. It's probably right that we leave it there. Those are my contact details. So if you want to jot those down, feel free to reach out to me. andrew.fox@intelligencegroup.co.uk is my email address. And Analytics Fox, if you want to follow me on Twitter, to my ramblings and musings there. So please reach out to us if you've got any questions, thoughts, or anything you want to do. We run these webinars on a monthly basis. Also, as an advert, a couple of the people who have come in this use cases have been on what we call a test drive from Intelligence. So I run a test drive every month whereby yourselves, people from organisations, come into our training centre in London. We have a suite of laptops out for them to use, and I take them through a half day of guided hands-on activities through Web Intelligence, BI4, Explorer, Design Studio, Lumira, and Mobile BI. So if you're not doing an evaluation today, and it might be easy for you to drop into our London office, feel free to do so. We run these on a monthly basis. If you want to get involved in one of those, ping me an email. We'll just watch out for our intelligence email bursts. We advertise those quite regularly. So it just leaves me to say thank you all very much for your time today. I hope it's been a worthwhile time. If you've got any feedback, please let me know how we can make these sessions easier. If the audio's been bad or the screens have been bad, let me know. We can see how we can fix it for next time. But I just want to say thank you very much for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day.